The second American airman who was missing 48 hours. He was missing for 48 hours, folks. Not just that, but he was missing for 48 hours behind enemy lines. But talk about an Easter miracle, he has been rescued.
That's right. And President Trump, who, by the way, was up all night for 2 days, people thought something was wrong with him because he wasn't showing face, because he was absolutely just involved in this at every single level. He called this one of the most daring search and rescue operations in our nation's history.
So let's go back to Trey Yingst live with the latest from Tel Aviv. Trey, it's just a remarkable, remarkable story of heroism, courage, and really tactical perfection.
Yeah, guys, absolutely. Good morning. The U.S. crew member who was missing in southwestern Iran after his F-15 was shot down has been rescued. The successful extraction was announced by President Trump overnight on Truth Social, who simply said, "We got him," before providing new details that dozens of U.S. military aircraft were used to retrieve him as U.S. leadership tracked his location. It was a daring operation that included hundreds of U.S. forces racing against the clock to rescue the crew member. Fox News has learned that after the fighter jet was shot down on Friday, the weapons systems officer hiked to an elevated mountain ridge where he hid and waited for retrieval. The pilot of the jet was rescued by U.S. Special Forces on Friday, but President Trump said they waited to confirm as to not jeopardize the second operation. The president added, quote, "This is the first time in military memory that 2 U.S. pilots have been rescued separately deep in enemy territory." The IDF said they avoided striking this area as American planes and helicopters flew at a low altitude, hoping to find any sign of the service member. Israeli forces, however, ramped up airstrikes over the weekend in other areas, targeting Iran's petrochemical plants. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu added this about the operation.
I promised you that we would continue to crush the terrorist regime in Tehran, and that is exactly what we are doing. After we destroyed 70% of their steel production capacity, which serves as raw material for their weapons, today we struck the petrochemical plants.
While Israel went on the offensive, they also took numerous incoming ballistic missiles over the weekend. Despite mostly hitting civilian targets in Israel, Iran has threatened to ramp up attacks with newer, more advanced missiles. They're also threatening to shoot down additional U.S. planes.
The enemy should know that we rely on new air defense systems built by the young, knowledgeable, and proud people of this country, unveiling them one after another in the field. We will certainly achieve full control of our country's skies and prove the humiliation of the weak enemy to the world more than ever.
Despite what the Iranians are saying, the reality is the United States and Israel have flown thousands of sorties over Iranian territory, striking a variety of military targets. And the operation overnight to rescue this U.S. crew member, nothing short of extraordinary. Guys?
Yeah, extraordinary indeed. And, you know, you have the IRGC spokesman there, Trey, saying that they have new technology. And we have obviously, as we've been following this day after day, F-15E Strike Eagle goes down. We think, oh, goodness, do we not have the air superiority that we believe are being told by the Pentagon? But now, in the wake of this extraordinary rescue mission, flying in hundreds of special forces and aircraft to extract him and getting out without a single U.S. casualty, it really may speak to we do have air superiority to a tremendous degree.
Yeah, this U.S. military rescue operation will go down in the history books as a successful operation that displayed not only the firepower but the intelligence of the U.S. military. Remember, hundreds of U.S. forces landed south of the Iranian city of Isfahan undetected, and they were able to make their way to this U.S. crew member who was missing for nearly 48 hours, hiding in a mountain range, and ultimately rescue their colleague and get him out of enemy territory. The Iranians can say that they have air superiority. The reality is quite different. U.S. forces not only were able to send in those special operators on the ground, but they were also watching from above. This was being monitored by President Trump and top U.S. generals for 2 days straight. And whenever Iranians approached this area where the crew member was hiding, they were struck. And this, again, speaks to the intelligence and how the United States was watching. The president made clear on Truth Social last night this U.S. crew member was never alone because the United States had this advanced technology, the Beaker inside the suit of this individual so that they could transmit their location to U.S. forces. The CIA was involved. These ground forces and special operators, along with dozens of U.S. military aircraft, landed there in Iran. This is deep inside enemy territory, and were able to take the fight to the Iranians and ensure that the suppression fire was accurate, so these Iranians were not able to approach. Remember, the Iranians had put out a request for civilians in Iran and a reward of thousands of dollars if they could capture this U.S. crew member. And they were unable to do so because of the deception campaign that was waged by the CIA to make the Iranians think that this individual was already in U.S. hands. While that was taking place, a massive operation was underway at the highest levels of the U.S. military and government to send in these special forces undetected south of this major Iranian city where there are thousands of Iranian military structures. And they were able to ultimately rescue this U.S. crew member and safely get not only the crew member, but all of these special operators out of Iranian territory.
So he was hiding somewhere in these mountains, which obviously he needed to do in order to not be captured by the people on the ground who were being told by the government, go get him, capture him. First they said kill him, then they said don't kill him, capture him, we want him alive. And they were offering $60,000 in bounty. But him hiding in these crevices in the mountains, one, had to have made it more difficult for the Americans to rescue him. And I want you to speak to that, Trey. But also, does this operation, I mean, Griff said, you know, this operation confirmed that we did have air superiority, but does it also confirm that we had agents on the ground, spies who were helping our operators, or were our operators operating alone with just the help of that beacon or whatever was inside of his uniform?
This operation speaks to the excellence of the U.S. military and their preparation for an event like this to take place. Thousands of U.S. and Israeli sorties have flown over the skies of Iran since Operation Epic Fury began, and this is the only incident of a U.S. fighter jet being shot down. And again, on Friday, the pilot was rescued by U.S. Special Forces, and overnight, this U.S. crew member was rescued. It speaks to the ability of the Americans to prepare for something that can happen during war, a plane being targeted. While much of Iran's air defense systems have been taken out as a result of the successful U.S. strikes, when they are able to shoot at U.S. planes, these special forces are waiting for the call to go in and rescue a colleague, like they did overnight with this U.S. crew member. But when you think about the details of this operation, it was an operation that used the highest levels of U.S. intelligence to launch this deception campaign, but also to locate where this crew member was and ensure that U.S. forces could get to him before the Iranians did. And when you think about what was taking place, the president was working through the day and night with top generals and military officials, understanding this was a race against the clock. This was not a simple mission. This was incredibly complex. But again, it speaks to the preparation of the U.S. military and the ability of U.S. Special Forces to get in, to operate, and to get out. And that's exactly what we saw overnight.
Trey, we've all had a chance to cover different conflicts. This is a unique one, to say the least. Just give us a sense from your perspective, having covered so many interesting stories over the years. Where does this one rank up there for you?
I think this sends a message to U.S. adversaries around the world, again, about the ability of the United States. Right now, there's a conflict that's been developing for more than a month as a result of Iran's inability to come to the negotiating table with a good faith deal. The president multiple times gave the Iranian regime an off-ramp before Operation Epic Fury began, and even in recent days. And that's part of the reason that President Trump over the weekend issued a new warning to the Iranian regime to come to the table and make reasonable concessions about their nuclear program and ballistic missile supply, or there will be consequences, according to the president and top officials that we've talked to in the region. But when you see the ability of the United States to send in hundreds of special forces undetected by Iranian leadership in an area very close to a city that has military infrastructure belonging to the Iranian regime, to get in, to rescue their colleague, and to get out, it again sends this message not just to the Iranian regime, but to adversaries around the world of the ability of the United States and the willingness of President Trump, when needed, to use the U.S. military to send a message of deterrence and to rescue anyone who is behind enemy lines. We saw that overnight, and we have seen that the past several weeks as Operation Epic Fury continues to decimate the Iranian regime and the military infrastructure that this regime spent decades building.
Thank you, Trey. Great report.
Great reporting.
Before we move to our next guest, I just want to say this. You know, not enough credit has been given. I think we can't give enough credit to the President of the United States. Yesterday, when we saw that this airman was missing, we all on the couch said, well, at least President Trump is in charge. We know he's not going to leave this man behind. And boy, he was up overnight. Reports have said he has never left his office. He's been tracking with the generals, with Pete Hegseth the entire time. And this is just notable because we're coming off of 4 years of a totally disengaged president to this. It's a remarkable, daring rescue, and only a very, very confident president would take this kind of a risk, because this could have been an absolute disaster, and it wasn't.
You bet. The risk couldn't be higher.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.